The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace, as Sergeant James Morrison adjusted his red tunic and straightened his bearskin hat. At 28 years old, he had served as a Queen's Guard for 6 years, standing motionless for hours while tourists snapped photos, and children tried their best to make him smile. Today felt different, though, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. The crowds were unusually thick for a Tuesday morning in March, school groups mixed with international visitors, all eager to witness the famous changing of the guard ceremony. James had taken his position at the main entrance, his polished boots firmly planted on the designated spot he had occupied countless times before. The familiar weight of his rifle rested against his shoulder, and his eyes remained fixed straight ahead, just as his training had taught him. Among the sea of faces, one particular figure caught his peripheral vision. A young boy, no more than 8 years old, stood apart from the other children. While his classmates giggled and waved at the guards, this boy remained perfectly still, his dark eyes focused intently on James. There was something unsettling about the child's behavior that made the seasoned guard's instincts twitch. The boy was dressed in a simple school uniform, navy blue sweater, gray trousers, and scuffed black shoes that suggested he came from a working-class family. His hair was slightly disheveled as if he had been running, and there was a thin layer of perspiration on his forehead despite the cool March air. What struck James most was the boy's expression. It wasn't the typical curiosity or mischief he usually saw in children's faces. Instead, there was an urgency, almost desperation, in those young eyes. James had been trained to ignore distractions, to remain stoic regardless of what happened around him. He had stood firm through rain, snow, and blazing summer heat. He had maintained his composure when tourists tried to provoke reactions, when flash photography temporarily blinded him, and when the occasional protester attempted to disrupt ceremonies. But something about this boy was different. The child's presence felt like a weight pressing against his consciousness. The boy's teacher, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses, was busy herding the rest of the students toward the palace gates. She held a clipboard in one hand and used the other to gesture animatedly as she explained the history of the royal residence. Her voice carried across the courtyard, mixing with the chatter of other tour guides and the constant clicking of cameras. She seemed completely unaware that one of her charges had separated from the group. As minutes ticked by, James noticed the boy inching closer. The child moved with deliberate care, never taking his eyes off the guard. Other visitors flowed around him like water around a stone, but the boy remained fixed on his target. James could feel sweat beginning to form beneath his heavy uniform despite the cool weather. His training screamed at him to maintain position, to ignore the distraction, but every instinct he had developed during his years of service told him something was wrong. The boy's lips began to move, though no sound emerged. James couldn't read lips, but the child seemed to be repeating the same words over and over again. The repetitive motion was hypnotic and deeply unsettling. The guard found himself straining to understand what the boy was trying to communicate, even though he knew he should remain focused on his duties. Other guards were positioned around the palace perimeter, each maintaining their own silent vigil. Tourists continued to pose for photos, children continued to giggle and point, and the normal rhythm of a busy morning at the palace continued unabated. Yet in James's world, everything had narrowed to focus on this one unusual child who seemed determined to capture his attention. The boy raised his small hand slowly, deliberately. His movements were careful and controlled, nothing like the spontaneous gestures typical of children his age. James watched from his peripheral vision as the child's fingers formed what appeared to be a specific pattern. It wasn't random fidgeting or nervous energy. This was intentional communication. James felt his heart rate increase. During his guard training, he had learned about various signals and codes used by security personnel and intelligence officers. While he had never encountered them in real situations, the muscle memory of those lessons remained sharp. What he was seeing from this boy bore an unsettling resemblance to some of those classified signals. The child's hand moved again, this time more urgently. The same pattern repeated, but with additional elements that James couldn't quite decipher. The boy's eyes never left the guard's face, searching for some sign of recognition or acknowledgement. The intensity of that stare was unlike anything James had experienced in his years of service. Around them, the world continued its normal pace. Tour buses rumbled past on the street beyond the palace gates. Street vendors called out to passing pedestrians, offering postcards and miniature replicas of the crown jewels. Pigeons pecked at, crumbs scattered by tourists, and the distant sound of traffic provided a constant urban soundtrack. But for James, all of these everyday sounds seemed to fade into background noise as his attention remained locked on the mysterious boy. The guard's training warred with his instincts. Protocol demanded that he remain at his post, that he ignore distractions and maintain the dignified silence that was the hallmark of the Queen's Guard. But 6 years of service had also taught him to trust his gut feelings, and right now, every fiber of his being was telling him that this situation was far from normal. The boy's expression grew more desperate as the minutes passed. His small face contorted with what appeared to be frustration, as if he was trying to convey something of vital importance, but lacked the means to do so effectively. The child glanced briefly toward his school group, which was now moving further away, then back to James with renewed urgency. Something was about to happen. James could feel it in his bones. The question was whether he would have the courage to break protocol and respond to whatever this boy was trying to tell him. The boy's hand movements became more frantic, and James finally recognized the pattern. It was a distress signal he had learned during advanced security training, a code used by undercover officers and intelligence operatives when they needed immediate assistance but couldn't speak openly. The realization hit him like a physical blow. How could an 8-year-old child possibly know classified military signals? James's mind raced through the possibilities. Perhaps the boy had seen the signals in a movie or television show, though. That seemed unlikely given the precise execution. Maybe he had learned them from a family member in the military or intelligence services. But the most disturbing possibility was that the child was in genuine danger and somehow knew exactly how to communicate that fact to someone who might be able to help. The boys' school group was now nearly 50 yards away, clustered around the palace's main gates where their teacher continued her educational lecture. The distance between the child and his classmates grew with each passing moment, yet none of the adults seemed to notice his absence. This struck James as particularly odd. Teachers were usually vigilant about keeping track of their students, especially during field trips to high-security locations like royal palaces. Sweat beaded on James's forehead beneath his bearskin hat. The heavy wool uniform that had protected him through countless hours of duty now felt suffocating. He could feel the weight of his rifle, the stiffness of his collar, and the pinch of his polished boots. But more than physical discomfort, he felt the crushing weight of indecision. Breaking formation wasn't just against protocol. It could end his military career and potentially compromise palace security. The boy took another step closer, now standing directly in front of James but still several feet away. His small hands continued the urgent signaling, and for the first time, James could see tears forming in the child's eyes. Whatever was happening, the boy was clearly terrified, yet he was trying to maintain enough composure to communicate effectively. The combination of fear and determination on such a young face was heartbreaking. Other tourists began to notice the unusual interaction. A few pointed and whispered among themselves, assuming they were witnessing another attempt to break the famous stoicism of the Queen's Guard. Some raised cameras, hoping to capture the moment when the soldier might crack and acknowledge the persistent child. They had no idea they were potentially documenting something far more serious than a tourist attraction. James caught sight of a man in a dark coat standing near the palace's side entrance. The stranger seemed to be watching the interaction between the guard and the boy with unusual interest. Unlike the casual observers and tourists, this man's attention was focused and calculating. He made no attempt to take photos or join the general crowd, instead maintaining a careful distance while keeping both James and the boy in his line of sight. The sight of the mysterious observer made James's blood run cold. If the boy was indeed in danger, this man might be connected to whatever threat the child was trying to communicate. The guard's training kicked in, and he began to assess the situation with military precision. The man was approximately 35 years old, average height and build, with sharp features and an alertness that suggested professional training. His coat was expensive but unremarkable, the kind of clothing chosen to blend into upscale surroundings. The boy noticed James's subtle shift in attention and followed the guard's gaze toward the man in the dark coat. The moment the child spotted the stranger, his signaling became almost frantic. The fear in his young eyes intensified dramatically, and his small body began to tremble visibly. Whatever connection existed between the boy and the mysterious observer, it was clearly the source of the child's terror. James made a split-second decision that would change everything. Military protocol, career concerns, and personal safety suddenly seemed less important than the welfare of a frightened child who had somehow found a way to ask for help. The guard's sense of duty had always been strong, but it extended beyond, protecting royal property to protecting innocent people, especially children. Moving with the measured pace required by his ceremonial role, James began to shift his position. To casual observers, it might appear as if he was making a routine adjustment to his stance, but in reality, he was preparing to abandon his post. The decision felt both terrifying and liberating. He was choosing humanity over protocol, compassion over career advancement. The boy seemed to sense the change in the guard's demeanor. Hope flickered in his terrified eyes, and his signaling became more controlled, more precise. He was no longer just crying for help. He was providing tactical information. Through his hand movements, the child indicated the direction of the threat, the number of potential hostiles, and even suggested a route of escape. The sophistication of this communication was astounding coming from someone so young. The man in the dark coat began moving closer, apparently realizing that something was wrong. His casual observer facade was slipping, replaced by the focused intensity of someone preparing to act. He reached inside his coat, and James glimpsed what appeared to be the outline of a weapon. The situation was escalating rapidly, and the guard knew he had only moments to respond. Other members of the Queen's Guard remained at their posts, unaware of the drama unfolding just yards away. The changing of the guard ceremony was scheduled to begin in 30 minutes, and preparations were already underway. Palace security forces were focused on crowd control and maintaining the elaborate choreography of the military tradition. No one was paying attention to one guard's interaction with a seemingly harmless school child. James felt the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders. Once he moved from his designated position, there would be no taking it back. His superiors would demand explanations, and if he was wrong about the threat, his career would be over. But as he looked into the boy's desperate eyes and saw the approaching danger, he realized there was really no choice at all. The guard took a deep breath, feeling the cool March air fill his lungs perhaps for the last time as a Queen's Guard in good standing. In the next few moments, he would either save a child's life or make the biggest mistake of his military career. Either way, he could no longer stand still and do nothing, while a frightened boy begged for help in a language only he seemed to understand. Without warning, James stepped forward, breaking the rigid formation that had defined his existence for the past 6 years. The movement felt surreal, as if he was watching someone else make the decision to abandon everything he had worked for. His heavy boots struck the cobblestones with deliberate purpose, each step taking him further from protocol and deeper into unknown territory. The boy's eyes widened with relief and gratitude as the tall guard approached. Up close, James could see that the child's school uniform was torn slightly at the shoulder, and there was a small bruise on his left wrist that hadn't been visible from a distance. These details painted a clearer picture of someone who had been in a struggle, someone who had escaped from a dangerous situation and was now seeking help from the only person who had understood his desperate signals. "What's your name?" James whispered, his voice barely audible over the bustling sounds of the tourist crowd. Speaking while on duty was another serious breach of protocol, but at this point, the guard was fully committed to helping the child regardless of the personal consequences. "Tommy," the boy replied in a small voice that carried traces of a London accent. "Tommy Chen. The bad man took my sister Emma from school yesterday. He said he would take me too if I told anyone, but I saw you, and I remembered the signals my Dad taught me before he died. He was in the army like you. The pieces began falling into place in James's mind. The boy's father had likely been a military intelligence officer who had taught his son emergency communication protocols as a safety measure. When Tommy found himself in danger, he had remembered those lessons and used them to seek help from someone he hoped would understand. The sophistication of the signals now made perfect sense. "Where is the man now?" James asked, his eyes scanning the crowd while maintaining the appearance of a normal conversation. His military training had taught him to gather intelligence quickly while remaining alert to changing threats. Tommy nodded toward the palace's side entrance where the mysterious observer had been standing. "He's been following me since I ran away this morning. He thinks I'm just a lost school kid, but I know he's waiting for a chance to grab me. He has a car parked on the street behind those trees." James felt a surge of admiration for the boy's intelligence and courage. Despite being only 8 years old and facing a terrifying situation, Tommy had managed to escape from his captor, evade recapture for several hours, and devise a plan to get help from someone uniquely positioned to assist him. The child had shown remarkable resourcefulness under extreme pressure. The man in the dark coat was indeed moving closer, weaving through the tourist crowd with practiced ease. He maintained the appearance of casual interest in the palace architecture, but his eyes remained fixed on Tommy and James. The stranger's hand stayed near the inside of his coat, ready to act quickly if the situation required it. "Tommy, I need you to stay very close to me and do exactly what I say," James instructed, his voice calm but urgent. "We're going to walk toward the main palace entrance where there are more guards and security cameras. Can you do that?" The ID boy nodded bravely, though James could see his small hands trembling. Tommy had been running on adrenaline and courage for hours, but the strain was beginning to show. The guard realized they needed to move quickly before the child's resolve crumbled, or before their pursuer decided to make his move. As they began walking toward the main entrance, James activated the small communication device hidden in his collar. All Queen's guards carried these emergency transmitters for situations requiring immediate backup, though James had never imagined using his under circumstances like these. "Control, this is guard position 7. I have a situation requiring immediate assistance. Possible child abduction in progress near the main entrance. Request backup and plainclothes security." The response came quickly through his nearly invisible earpiece. "Position 7. Confirm you are breaking post protocol. State nature of emergency." "Confirmed, Control. Child approached with intelligence-level distress signals indicating immediate danger. Pursuing suspect visible in courtyard. This is not a drill." Tommy looked up at James with a mixture of fear and hope as they walked. "Will you really help me find Emma? She's only 5 years old and she gets scared when I'm not with her. We promised Mum we'd always look after each other after Dad died." The mention of the boy's sister added another layer of urgency to the situation. If Tommy was telling the truth, there was another child in immediate danger, possibly being held captive by the same people who were now pursuing him. James felt the full weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He wasn't just helping one frightened boy anymore. He was potentially the key to rescuing 2 children from a dangerous criminal organization. The man in the dark coat had closed the distance to approximately 20 yards and was no longer making any pretense of casual sightseeing. His movement became more direct and purposeful, cutting through the crowd with increasing urgency. James could see the tension in the stranger's posture and recognized the body language of someone preparing for action. Other tourists were beginning to notice the unusual scene unfolding before them. Some pulled out phones to record what they assumed was an interesting interaction between a guard and a lost child. Others pointed and whispered, creating a growing circle of attention around James and Tommy. While the increased scrutiny might deter their pursuer temporarily, it also made the situation more complicated and potentially dangerous for innocent bystanders. James spotted 2 of his fellow guards near the main entrance, both maintaining their ceremonial positions but clearly alert to his approach. He knew they would be receiving information through their own communication devices about the developing situation. Palace security protocols would be activating, bringing additional resources to bear on the potential threat. "Tommy, when we reach those other guards, I want you to stand directly between them, James instructed. You'll be safe there while we deal with the bad man. Can you remember your home address and your mother's phone number? The boy recited both pieces of information clearly despite his obvious stress. James was impressed by the child's ability to maintain focus under pressure. Clearly, his military father had trained him well for emergency situations. That training might very well have saved both children's lives. Behind them, the man in the dark coat had stopped his advance and appeared to be speaking into a mobile phone. James realized with growing concern that their pursuer might not be working alone. If this was indeed a professional kidnapping operation, there could be additional threats they hadn't yet identified. The situation was becoming more complex and dangerous by the minute, requiring immediate intervention by specially trained personnel. As James and Tommy reached the main palace entrance, plainclothes security officers began emerging from strategic positions around the courtyard. They moved with professional efficiency, their casual tourist disguises falling away as they focused on the developing threat. James felt a surge of relief knowing that backup had arrived, but he also understood that the most dangerous part of the operation was just beginning. Detective Inspector Sarah Walsh approached from the left, her credentials already in hand. She was a seasoned officer from the Metropolitan Police's Specialist Protection Unit, someone James had seen during security briefings, but had never worked with directly. Her presence indicated that the palace security team was taking Tommy's situation very seriously indeed. Sergeant Morrison, I'm D.I. Walsh. We've been monitoring your communications. Is this the child who signaled for help? She asked, kneeling down to Tommy's eye level with the practiced ease of someone experienced in dealing with frightened children. Tommy looked up at James uncertainly before nodding. The bad man is still watching us. He's over there by the fountain, talking on his phone. He has my sister Emma somewhere, and he was trying to take me too. Detective Walsh's expression hardened as she followed Tommy's gaze toward the fountain where the man in the dark coat stood with his phone pressed to his ear. She spoke quietly into her own communication device, coordinating with other officers positioned around the palace grounds. The net was tightening around their suspect, but they needed to act carefully to avoid spooking him into dangerous action. Tommy, you did exactly the right thing by asking Sergeant Morrison for help, Walsh said gently. Now we need you to tell us everything you can remember about yesterday when Emma was taken, and about where you think she might be now. The boy took a shaky breath and began his story. Emma and I were walking home from school together like always. Mom works late at the hospital, so we have keys to let ourselves in. A car pulled up next to us, and the man said he knew our dad from the army. He showed us a picture of Dad in uniform, so we thought it was okay. James felt a chill run through him. The kidnappers had done their research, using the children's trust in their deceased father's military connections to gain access to them. It was a calculated, professional operation that suggested significant planning and resources. He gave us sweets and said he wanted to show us something special that belonged to our dad, Tommy continued, his voice growing smaller. But when we got in the car, he locked the doors and drove us to a big house outside London. Emma started crying, and he got angry. He put her in a different room and told me if I tried to escape or told anyone, he would hurt her. Detective Walsh exchanged glances with James, both recognizing the hallmarks of an organized child trafficking operation. These cases were among the most serious and time-sensitive investigations the police handled, requiring immediate action and coordinated response from multiple agencies. How did you manage to get away, Tommy? Walsh asked, her tone carefully controlled to avoid frightening the child further. This morning the man went to get food and forgot to lock my door properly. I waited until I heard his car leave, then I climbed out a window and ran. I remembered Dad telling me that if I was ever in trouble and couldn't find a policeman, I should look for a soldier, because soldiers are trained to protect people. When I saw the guards at the palace, I remembered the hand signals Dad taught me. The boy's story painted a picture of remarkable courage and resourcefulness. Despite being only 8 years old and facing a terrifying situation, Tommy had remained calm enough to escape and seek help using specialized knowledge most adults didn't possess. His military father's training had literally saved his life. James noticed that the man by the fountain had finished his phone call, and was now moving purposefully toward the palace exit. The suspect appeared to be preparing to leave, possibly having received instructions from associates or realizing that the situation was becoming too dangerous for him to remain. "He's moving," James reported quietly to Detective Walsh. "If he gets away now, we might lose our only lead to finding Emma." Walsh spoke rapidly into her radio, coordinating with officers positioned at various exit points around the palace grounds. The suspect would find himself surrounded by plainclothes police no matter which direction he chose to go. But the detective knew that cornering a dangerous criminal in a crowded public space carried significant risks for innocent bystanders. Tommy suddenly gripped James's arm tightly. "There's something else," he whispered urgently. "I heard him talking to someone on the phone yesterday. He said they were taking children to a place called The Garden and that they had buyers coming from overseas. I think Emma might not be the only one." The implications of Tommy's revelation hit both adults like a physical blow. If the boys' information was accurate, they weren't dealing with a simple kidnapping but with an international child trafficking ring. Emma and possibly other children were in immediate danger, and time was running out to locate them before they disappeared forever. Detective Walsh's expression became grimly determined. "Tommy, this information is incredibly important. Do you remember anything else about the house where you were held? Any details about the location, the building, or the people there?" The boy closed his eyes, clearly trying to recall every detail that might help rescue his sister. It was a big white house with a red door and tall trees all around it. There were bars on the windows, and I could hear other children crying sometimes. The man called someone named Marcus on the phone, and he kept talking about a shipment leaving tonight. James felt his heart racing. If the criminals were planning to move their victims tonight, they had perhaps only hours to locate the house and rescue the children. Every minute of delay could mean the difference between successful rescue and losing the children forever to international traffickers. The man by the fountain had now reached the palace's main gate, but as he attempted to exit, he was quietly intercepted by two plainclothes officers. From a distance, it appeared to be a casual conversation, but James could see the tension in the suspect's body language as he realized he was surrounded. "We've got him," Detective Walsh reported, watching the arrest through binoculars. "Now we need to make him talk, and we need to do it fast. Tommy's information gives us a starting point, but we need more details to locate that house before they move the children." Tommy looked up at James with eyes that seemed far too old for his young face. "Will you help find Emma? I promised Mom I'd always protect her, but I couldn't stop them from taking her away." James knelt down beside the brave boy, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Tommy, you've already done more to save your sister than most adults could have managed. Because you were so smart and brave, we now know where to look for her. The police are going to find Emma and bring her home safely." As palace security took the suspect into custody and Detective Walsh coordinated the expanding investigation, James realized that his decision to abandon his post had been the right one. Protocol and career concerns seemed insignificant compared to the lives of innocent children hanging in the balance. Within 2 hours of the suspect's arrest, Detective Walsh had assembled a joint task force comprising Metropolitan Police specialists, MI5 operatives, and international trafficking investigators. The interrogation of the captured man, who identified himself as Viktor Petrov, had revealed the existence of a sophisticated criminal network operating across multiple countries. Tommy's brave escape had exposed something far larger than a simple kidnapping case. Petrov initially refused to cooperate, claiming he was merely a driver who knew nothing about the operation's details. However, when presented with Tommy's detailed testimony and evidence linking him to other missing children cases across Europe, his resolve began to crumble. The prospect of life imprisonment for child trafficking charges finally convinced him to negotiate a plea agreement in exchange for information. James remained at the palace, officially relieved of guard duty while internal investigations examined his decision to abandon his post. However, Detective Walsh had requested that he stay involved in the case as Tommy's primary support contact. The boy had formed a strong bond with the guard who had answered his desperate plea for help, and child psychologists emphasized the importance of maintaining that connection during the traumatic rescue operation. Tommy sat in a comfortable interview room at New Scotland Yard, wrapped in a blanket and sipping hot chocolate while providing additional details about his captivity. Despite his young age, he demonstrated remarkable recall for important information that could help locate his sister and the other victims. The house had a big garden with high walls all around it, Tommy explained to Detective Walsh. I could see a church tower from the upstairs window, and there was a railway bridge nearby because I heard trains going by every few minutes. The man called Marcus had a foreign accent, maybe Russian, like the man you caught. Child psychology. Experts observed the interview through one-way glass, marveling at Tommy's composure and the sophisticated survival training his father had apparently provided. The boy's ability to remain calm under extreme stress and gather useful intelligence had been crucial to breaking open the trafficking case. Detective Walsh cross-referenced Tommy's description with satellite imagery and railway maps around London, quickly identifying several potential locations. The mention of a church tower visible from an upstairs window narrowed the search area significantly, particularly when combined with the proximity to rail lines and the description of a large, white house with security features. James sat with Tommy during breaks in the questioning, amazed by the boy's resilience. Despite everything he had endured, Tommy's primary concern remained his sister's safety and his promise to their deceased father to protect her. The guard found himself deeply moved by the child's courage and determination. "Do you think Emma is scared?" Tommy asked during one of their conversations. "She's never been away from home without me before. I used to read her bedtime stories every night after Dad died. I think Emma knows her big brother is doing everything possible to bring her home," James replied gently. "She's probably being very brave, just like you taught her to be." Meanwhile, Petrov's cooperation had revealed disturbing details about the trafficking operation. The network specialized in targeting children from military families, believing that their discipline and training made them more valuable to certain buyers. Emma and Tommy had been specifically selected because their father's military background suggested they would be easier to control and less likely to cause problems during transport. The criminal organization operated from multiple locations, moving children quickly between safe houses to avoid detection. According to Petrov, Emma was currently being held at a facility outside London with approximately 12 other children, ranging in age from 4 to 15 years old. The group was scheduled to be moved to a shipping container that evening for transport to buyers in Eastern Europe. Detective Walsh felt the pressure of the ticking clock as she coordinated simultaneous raids on 3 suspected locations. The children's lives depended on precise timing and flawless execution. If the traffickers suspected they had been compromised, they might accelerate their timeline or, worse, eliminate evidence by harming their victims. Tommy provided one final crucial piece of information that helped pinpoint Emma's location. "I remember hearing a really loud bell chiming every hour," he told the investigators. "It was different from regular church bells, more like a big clock tower, and there were airplanes flying over pretty often, really low like they were landing somewhere nearby. The combination of railway proximity, church visibility, clock tower sounds, and aircraft flight patterns created a precise geographic profile. Within 30 minutes, analysts had identified the target location: a converted farmhouse near Heathrow Airport, situated between 2 railway lines with clear sight lines to the historic church tower in nearby Harlington. As tactical teams prepared for the rescue operation, Tommy made a simple request that touched everyone involved in the case. "Can Sergeant Morrison come with you to get Emma?" he asked Detective Walsh. "She doesn't know any of you, but I've told her about soldiers like our dad. If she sees his uniform, she'll know she's safe." James felt honored by the boy's trust and immediately volunteered to participate in the rescue mission. While he had no tactical training for such operations, his presence could provide crucial reassurance to frightened children who had been taught to trust military personnel by their deceased father. Detective Walsh agreed to the arrangement, recognizing the psychological value of having a familiar military figure present during the rescue. James would accompany the tactical team, but remain in a support role, focused on providing comfort and stability to the victims rather than participating in any dangerous aspects of the operation. As evening approached, 3 separate tactical teams moved into position around the suspected locations. Surveillance had confirmed significant activity at the farmhouse near Heathrow, with multiple vehicles and individuals moving in patterns consistent with preparing for a major transport operation. Intelligence suggested that the criminals planned to move their victims within the next few hours. Tommy insisted on waiting at the police station until his sister was safely recovered, despite offers to take him to relatives. "I need to be here when Emma arrives," he explained with mature determination. "She'll need to see me right away to know everything's okay." James admired the boy's unwavering loyalty to his sister and his understanding of what she would need most after her traumatic experience. Tommy's emotional intelligence and protective instincts seemed remarkable for someone so young, though perhaps they had been forged by the early loss of his father and the responsibility he felt as his sister's guardian. The final phase of the operation was about to begin, with multiple children's lives hanging in the balance and time running out before the traffickers could disappear with their victims forever. At exactly 8:47 p.m., armed response teams simultaneously breached 3 locations across London. The farmhouse near Heathrow proved to be the correct target, with tactical officers discovering 13 children locked in converted outbuildings behind the main house. Emma Chen was among them, frightened but physically unharmed, clutching a small stuffed rabbit that Tommy had described during his interviews. James followed the rescue teams into the compound, his red tunic and bare skin creating an unusual sight among the black-clad tactical officers. As they approached the children, many of whom were crying and clearly traumatized, his distinctive uniform had exactly the effect Tommy had predicted. Several of the children, apparently from military families themselves, immediately recognized the ceremonial dress and began to calm down. Emma, despite being only 5 years old, spotted James's uniform and called out, "Are you a soldier like my daddy was?" Tommy said soldiers would come to help us. Her innocent question brought tears to the eyes of hardened police officers who had seen too much tragedy in their careers. "Yes, I'm a soldier, and your brother Tommy sent me to bring you home," James replied gently, kneeling down to her level. "He's been very brave and very worried about you. He's waiting for you at a safe place where we can take you right now." Emma's face lit up with relief and joy at the mention of her brother's name. She ran toward James without hesitation, wrapping her small arms around his neck in a fierce hug that reminded him why he had made the decision to abandon his post hours earlier. In that moment, all concerns about his military career seemed insignificant compared to the reunion he was about to facilitate. The rescue operation had been a complete success. In addition to the 13 children found at the farmhouse, police had arrested 8 members of the trafficking network, including the mysterious Marcus, whom Tommy had overheard on the phone. Evidence seized from the location revealed connections to similar operations across Europe, leading to coordinated arrests in 5 different countries over the following days. Detective Walsh coordinated the complex logistics of reuniting the rescued children with their families while ensuring they received appropriate medical and psychological care. The victims ranged in age from 4 to 15 and came from 7 different countries, highlighting the international scope of the criminal enterprise that Tommy's courage had helped expose. During the drive back to London, Emma sat beside James in the police vehicle, chattering about her ordeal with the resilient spirit typical of young children. She told him about the other children in the house, how they had tried to take care of each other, and how she had known Tommy would find a way to rescue her because he promised Daddy he would always protect me. Back at New Scotland Yard, the reunion between Tommy and Emma was emotional and heartwarming. The siblings embraced tightly, both crying with relief and joy. Tommy whispered reassurances to his little sister, apologizing for not being able to protect her from being taken and promising that nothing like that would ever happen again. James watched the reunion from a respectful distance, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction despite the uncertainty surrounding his own future. His commanding officers had been notified of his role in breaking up the trafficking ring, but military discipline still required that he face consequences for abandoning his post without authorization, regardless of the positive outcome. Over the following weeks, the story of the brave boy who had used military signals to save his sister and expose an international trafficking ring captured public attention around the world. Media outlets praised Tommy's intelligence and courage, while also highlighting the quick thinking of Sergeant Morrison in recognizing the child's distress signals and choosing to help despite the potential consequences. The children's mother, Sarah Chen, a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital, was overwhelmed with gratitude when she learned the full details of her son's heroic actions. She had been working a double shift when the children failed to come home from school, and the next 24 hours had been the worst of her life, until the police called to tell her both children were safe. "My husband always said he was teaching Tommy those signals as a game, a way to bond over military traditions," Sarah explained to reporters. "He never imagined they would actually save our children's lives. I think he would be incredibly proud of how brave and smart Tommy was and how he never gave up on bringing Emma home." Tommy's story also brought attention to the broader issue of child trafficking and the sophisticated methods used by criminal organizations to target vulnerable families. Parliament launched an investigation into security gaps that allowed such operations to flourish, leading to new legislation strengthening penalties for child trafficking and improving support services for victims. James faced a military tribunal to answer for his breach of protocol, but the hearing became more of a celebration than a disciplinary proceeding. His commanding officers, while obligated to address the technical violation of leaving his post, were unanimous in their praise for his decision-making under extraordinary circumstances. The case became a textbook example of when rigid adherence to protocol should give way to moral imperative and human compassion. Rather than facing punishment, James was commended for his actions and offered a transfer to a specialized unit, working with Child Protection Services. His experience with Tommy had revealed an aptitude for working with young victims of crime, and his military background made him valuable for cases involving children from service families. 6 months later, James attended Tommy's 9th birthday party at the Chen family home. The boy had returned to school and was receiving counseling to help him process his traumatic experience, but his resilient spirit remained strong. Emma, now 6, had also recovered well from her ordeal and delighted in telling anyone who would listen about how her big brother had saved her with secret soldier codes. During the party, Tommy presented James with a hand-drawn picture showing a tall, red-uniformed guard standing next to 2 small children outside Buckingham Palace. At the bottom, in careful child's handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for listening when I couldn't talk." The simple gift moved James deeply, serving as a permanent reminder of the day when breaking the rules had been the most important decision of his life. He had learned that true courage sometimes meant choosing compassion over protocol, and that the most significant battles weren't always fought on traditional battlefields. As James watched Tommy and Emma playing with their friends in the garden, he reflected on how a single moment of decision had changed multiple lives forever. A frightened boy's desperate signal had not only saved his sister, but had exposed a criminal network, rescued 12 other children, and demonstrated that sometimes the most profound acts of heroism come from simply choosing to care when others might look away. The case had also strengthened the bond between the Chen family and James, who became an honorary uncle to both children. Tommy continued to be fascinated by military history and protocol, though he now understood the difference between following rules and doing what was right. His experience had taught him that true strength came not from rigid adherence to authority, but from having the courage to act according to one's conscience when innocent lives were at stake. Years later, Tommy would often tell the story of the day he signaled for help outside Buckingham Palace, always emphasizing that the real hero wasn't the frightened boy who asked for assistance, but the soldier who was brave enough to break ranks and answer that call for help. The secret signals his father had taught him as a child's game had indeed saved lives, but it was the human compassion of a guard who chose to listen that had made all the difference.